I'm a Null, a human whose scent is invisible to shifters. It's why I'm the only person in the city who can deep clean an alpha's penthouse without triggering a mating frenzy. At least, that was the plan. When a ventilation mishap carries my citrus and sass aroma directly into Baron Maxwell's private sanctuary, the reclusive billionaire doesn't just open the door, he rips it off the hinges. Now, the most powerful wolf in the pack is convinced I'm his fated mate, and he's standing in my way with obsidian eyes and a $3,000 suit. He thinks he can claim me. I think he's tracking mud on my freshly waxed marble. The battle of the century has begun, and I'm armed with a spray bottle. Welcome back to Daniella's Romance Library. I am so glad you've joined us for another escape into a world of heat, heart, and high-stakes passion. Before we dive into today's story, I want to hear from you. Please head down to the comments and let me know which part of the world you're listening from today. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Thank you for being part of the library. Now, let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Gold Standard. The scent of reclusive billionaire alpha usually smells like expensive mahogany and a hint of wet dog, but Baron Maxwell's penthouse smelled like a vacuum-sealed tomb. I've cleaned for senators, celebrities, and at least one dragon shifter with a hoarding problem. But this place was different. It was too quiet, too perfect. My 3 rules of professionalism are simple. Don't touch the art, don't read the mail, and for the love of all that is holy, do not interact with the employer, especially when that employer is a man whose heartbeat can probably be heard from the lobby. I'm a Null, invisible to the shifter world's nose, which is why I'm the only human in the city who can scrub an alpha's floors without accidentally triggering a mating frenzy. At least that's what the brochure said. The ink stain on the Persian rug in the north wing was staring at me like a personal insult. Most people would have thrown the whole rug away, but I don't believe in defeat. I knelt on the silk fibers, armed with my proprietary Petra's Miracle Mist and a microfiber cloth. This wing was supposed to be empty. Maxwell was in a high-stakes board meeting 3 floors below. My contact explicitly stated that the north wing was a ghost zone during business hours. "You're going down, you stubborn little blotch," I whispered, spritzing the rug with a mixture of lemon, eucalyptus, and a chemical compound I'd spent 3 years perfecting. I was so focused on the chemical reaction of the ink that I didn't notice the sudden change in the air. The silence of the penthouse didn't just break, it vanished. From behind the heavy, reinforced oak doors of the private study, the one place I was strictly forbidden from even looking at, there was a sound like a freight train hitting a brick wall. Thump. I froze, my spray bottle poised like a weapon. That was a heartbeat, a very loud, very agitated heartbeat. Rule number 4, I muttered to myself. If the alpha starts growling, the maid starts going. But I was mid-scrub. If I stopped now, the ink would set. It was a matter of professional pride. I gave the rug one more aggressive spritz. Then, the air in the hallway shifted. The HVAC system, which usually hummed at a low, consistent frequency, suddenly pulsed. A violent gust of air swept from the vent directly above me, swirled around my citrus-soaked hair, and was sucked, with terrifying efficiency, straight under the crack of those reinforced study doors. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a volcano decides it's had enough of being a mountain. Crack. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the marble hallway. I didn't even have time to stand up before the heavy oak door, the one specifically designed to keep out literal monsters, didn't just swing open. It was launched. One of the hinges screamed as the door dangled at a sickening angle, revealing a shadow so large it blotted out the midday sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stayed on my knees, microfiber cloth in hand, looking up, and up, and up. Baron Maxwell didn't look like a billionaire tech mogul. He looked like a storm cloud that had learned how to wear a $3,000 suit. His pupils were so blown out that his eyes were solid obsidian, and his chest was heaving as if he'd just run a marathon. The air around him was vibrating with a physical, magnetic heat that made my skin prickle. "You," he rasped. The word wasn't a question. It was a seismic event. I looked at the spray bottle in my hand, then at the half-removed ink stain, then back at the man who looked like he was about to vibrate out of his skin. "The door is coming out of your security deposit," I said, my voice remarkably steady for someone whose internal organs were currently doing the tango. "And you're tracking mud on my freshly waxed marble?" Baron didn't move. He didn't even blink. He took a long, jagged breath, his nostrils flaring as he focused entirely on me. "What? Are you?" "I'm the person you hired to clean this mausoleum," I snapped, finally standing up and wiping my hands on my apron. "And if you're done breaking the furniture, I have a rug to save." I stepped forward, intending to push past him to get my bucket, but Baron moved with a speed that defied physics. In a heartbeat, he was inches from me. He didn't touch me. It felt like there was an invisible barrier of pure electricity between us. But he leaned down, his face hovering just above the crook of my neck. He didn't just smell me. He inhaled as if I were the first breath of oxygen he'd had in a century. "Petra," he growled, my name sounding like a prayer and a threat all at once. "It's Ms. Creed to you," I said, though my heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs. His hand reached out, trembling, as if he were trying to fight the urge to grab me. "The scent. It's coming through the walls. It's burning me." I raised my spray bottle, pointing it directly at his nose. "Back off, big guy, or you're going to find out if my miracle mist works on alphas as well as it works on wine stains." Baron's eyes locked onto mine, the black depths of his pupils swirling with something primal and terrifyingly focused. He didn't back off. Instead, he did something much worse. He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing me whole, and whispered a single word that made the spray bottle slip from my numb fingers. Chapter 2. The Breach. "Mine." The word didn't just vibrate in the air, it settled into my bones like a physical weight. I've heard alphas bark orders before, and I've seen the way people scramble to please them, but this was different. This wasn't an order. It was a statement of fact, as if he were looking at a mountain and calling it stone. The spray bottle clattered against the marble floor, the plastic trigger echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. I stared at Baron, my breath hitching in my throat. His pupils were so wide they swallowed the iris, leaving nothing but two pools of endless, hungry black. He was vibrating, literally vibrating, with a tension that made the air feel like it was humming. "Mine," he repeated, lower this time, a gravelly rumble that started deep in his chest. He took a half step forward, closing the microscopic gap between us. The heat radiating off him was like standing next to an open furnace. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was intoxicating. It smelled like cedar wood after a storm and something dark, metallic, and expensive. I finally found my voice, though it sounded a lot thinner than I wanted it to. "I don't know what kind of billionaire fever you've got, Mr. Maxwell, but I am currently on the clock, and mine is not a professional way to address the custodial staff." I reached down, my fingers brushing his expensive Italian leather shoes as I snatched my spray bottle back. I used the movement to create distance, stepping back and holding the bottle between us like a holy symbol against a vampire. Baron's gaze followed me with a terrifying, predatory focus. He looked like he was fighting a war behind his eyes, his knuckles white as he gripped the doorframe, or what was left of it. "You're a Null," he gasped, the words sounding like they were being torn out of him. "I've met thousands of humans, hundreds of Nulls. They have no scent. They are blank. But you?" He stepped into the hallway, and for the first time, I saw the true scale of him. He was built like he was carved out of granite, his suit jacket straining against shoulders that had no business being that broad. "You smell like the sun," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Like wild honey and ozone and defiance. I could smell you through 3 inches of reinforced oak. It nearly drove me through the glass of my own windows." I snorted, even though my knees felt like they were made of jelly. "It's called lemon zest elixir, Baron. I sell it for $29 a gallon. If you like it that much, I'll give you a discount on a bulk order, but stop looking at me like I'm a ribeye steak. It's creepy. It's not the cleaner, he growled, and before I could blink, he was in my space again. He didn't grab me. His hands stayed clenched at his sides, as if he were afraid he'd crush me if he touched me, but he leaned in, his nose brushing the hair at my temple. It's you. My wolf. He's clawing at my ribs just to get a closer look. I've waited 112 years for a scent to trigger the bond. I thought I was broken. I thought I was alone. He looked at me then, the obsidian in his eyes flickering with a sudden, devastating vulnerability. It was a look that didn't belong on a man who could buy and sell cities. It was the look of a man who had been lost in a desert for a century and had just found a drop of water. My heart did a traitorous little flip. I pushed the feeling down with the practiced ease of a woman who had dealt with pushy men my whole life. Okay, look, I get it. You had a moment. The vents blew, you got a face full of lemon freshness, and your inner dog went haywire. But I have a business to run, and I don't do destiny. I do invoices. I turned on my heel, walking toward my cleaning trolley with as much swagger as I could muster while my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I'm leaving, I called over my shoulder. I'll send you a bill for the rug, the door, and the hazardous emotional labor I just performed. We'll finish the north wing when you've had a nap and a cold shower. Petra, wait! I didn't wait. I grabbed the handle of my trolley and headed for the elevator. I could feel his eyes on my back, a physical pressure that made the hair on my arms stand up. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding and I stepped inside, frantically hitting the lobby button. As the doors began to close, Baron reached out, his hand stopping the sensors. He didn't step in. He just stood there, the broken doorway of his sanctuary behind him, looking like a king who had just watched his kingdom walk away. You can run, he said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency that vibrated right through the elevator floor. But you've already marked my soul, Petra Creed. I'm an alpha. I don't lose what belongs to me. The doors hissed shut, cutting off the sight of him. I leaned against the mirrored wall, staring at my reflection. My face was flushed, and my hands were shaking so hard the spray bottle was rattling. It's just pheromones, I whispered to myself. Pheromones and a very, very expensive suit. But as the elevator descended, I realized I'd left something behind. My favorite microfiber cloth was still lying on the rug in the north wing. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that Baron Maxwell was probably holding it to his face right now. Chapter 3. The Corporate Gambit. Most people, after being told they were the fated mate of a billionaire werewolf, would probably go into hiding or perhaps move to a different hemisphere. I spent the next morning aggressively filing taxes. It's hard to worry about destiny when you're staring at the rising cost of industrial-grade degreaser. I was in my tiny office above a laundromat, the smell of dryer sheets and stale coffee my only companions when the floor began to vibrate. It wasn't the washing machines. It was a rhythmic, heavy thrumming that sounded like a motorcade. I pulled back the Venetian blinds just in time to see 3 blacked-out SUVs screech to a halt at the curb. Men in suits that cost more than my car spilled out, forming a perimeter. And then the door of the middle vehicle opened. Baron Maxwell stepped out, looking like he had stepped off a runway and onto a battlefield. He didn't look at the cracked sidewalk or the local graffiti. He looked up, his eyes locking onto my window as if he had a GPS tracker installed in my skull. Rule number 5, I muttered, grabbing my lukewarm coffee. If they bring a motorcade, lock the door. I didn't even get to the deadbolt before the stairs groaned under a massive weight. A second later, my office door, which was mostly frosted glass and hope, rattled in its frame. Petra, open the door. I'm closed for private consultations, Mr. Maxwell, I yelled back. And if you break this door, I'm calling the police. I don't care how many pack lawyers you have. There was a pause. Then the door opened, slowly, politely, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had kicked it down. Baron stepped into my cramped office, his presence making the room feel like a dollhouse. He was dressed in charcoal gray today, the fabric hugging his frame in a way that should have been illegal. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, inhaling deeply, his eyes closing for a brief, blissful second. "You're still wearing the lemon scent," he murmured. "It's my brand, Baron, literally." I sat back in my creaky swivel chair and crossed my arms. "What do you want? I already sent the invoice for the penthouse." Baron didn't look at my desk. He looked at me. "I'm not here about the invoice, I'm here to discuss a merger." I laughed, a sharp, dry sound. "A merger? You own a tech empire. I own 4 vacuum cleaners and a van with a temperamental transmission. What could you possibly want to merge with?" "My life," he said, his voice perfectly level. "But since I know you value your independence above all else, I decided to start with something you understand. Business." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He placed it on my desk with a heavy thud. "That is a 5-year exclusive contract for elite spick-span to handle the maintenance for the entire Maxwell corporate holdings. Every office, every warehouse, every private residence from here to the coast." I stared at the folder. My heart skipped a beat, but not for the reason he wanted. That contract was worth millions. It was the kind of deal that would turn my small business into an empire overnight. It was a golden cage, and he was holding the door open. "And the catch?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "Do I have to move into the kennel? Wear a collar? Change my name to Luna?" Baron leaned over my desk, his large hands planting on the scarred wood. He didn't crowd me, but the sheer intensity of his gaze was like a physical touch. "The catch is that I get to see you, frequently. I'm not asking for your submission, Petra. I'm asking for a chance to earn your respect. This contract is strictly professional. I've even had my lawyers include a no-looming clause if it makes you feel better." I looked from the contract to his face. He was serious, deadly serious. He was trying to buy my time because he knew he couldn't buy my heart. It was clever, infuriatingly clever. "If I sign this," I said, my finger tracing the edge of the leather, "you stay behind the desk, I stay in the hallway. No mine, no fated mates, and no breaking the furniture." Baron's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile, the first one I'd seen. It transformed his face from a mask of stone into something devastatingly handsome. "Agreed. For now." I reached for my pen, my mind racing. I could take the money, build the business, and keep him at arm's length. I was a Null. I was immune to his charms. I was in control. I signed the last page with a flourish and pushed it back to him. "Congratulations, Mr. Maxwell. You just hired the most expensive cleaning service in the city." Baron took the folder, his fingers brushing mine as he did. A jolt of electricity shot up my arm, making my breath hitch. He felt it too. His eyes flared with that obsidian heat. "I have one more thing," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "A bonus for the signing." "I don't do bonuses," I snapped, trying to ignore the way my skin was humming. "It's not for you," he said, stepping back and gesturing toward the door. "It's for the van." I frowned and stood up, walking to the window. Down in the street, a flatbed truck was pulling away, leaving a brand-new top-of-the-line industrial transit van parked in my spot. It was painted in my company colors, with a professional logo on the side and a customized license plate that read, Null 1. I turned to glare at him, but Baron was already halfway out the door. "That's a gift, Petra," he called out, his voice full of a dark, playful triumph. "And since it's a gift, it's not covered by the contract. I'll see you tomorrow morning at the headquarters. Wear the lemon. I have a feeling the air conditioning is going to be temperamental." He vanished down the stairs before I could yell at him. I stood in my tiny office, looking at the empty space where he'd been, the scent of cedarwood still lingering in the air. I looked down at the contract on my desk, then back out the window at the shiny new van. My phone chimed with a notification. It was a text from an unknown number. "I hope you like the seats. They're heated. I know how you hate the cold." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was already in my head. He was already watching. and as I looked at the Null 1 plates, I realized something terrifying. I hadn't just signed a contract. I'd given the wolf a map straight to my door. And then, my office door creaked open again. I expected Baron, but instead, a small, silver-haired man in a lab coat stood there, holding a tablet and looking at me with wide, frantic eyes. "Ms. Creed?" he squeaked. "I'm Dr. Eris, the Maxwell Pack physician. I need a sample of your blood immediately, because according to the sensors in the penthouse, you shouldn't exist." Chapter 4. The Pursuit. I stared at the frantic little man in the lab coat, my hand still gripping the edge of my desk. "I'm sorry, what? I shouldn't exist? That's funny, because my landlord and the IRS seem very convinced that I do." Dr. Eris didn't laugh. He stepped into my office, his tablet chirping like a panicked bird. No, physically you are here. But biologically? You are a walking impossibility. I've been the Maxwell Pack physician for 40 years, Ms. Creed. I have monitored every alpha in this lineage. When an alpha scents his mate, it's a chemical explosion, but you have no biological signature. You are a null. To my equipment, you are a ghost. And yet, Baron Maxwell just leveled a reinforced oak door because his wolf decided you were the center of the universe. "It was a ventilation fluke," I said, crossing my arms. "The HVAC kicked in, he got a face full of cleaning supplies, and he had a midlife crisis. Can we go back to the part where you aren't taking my blood?" "It's not a fluke." Eris practically bounced on his heels. "Baron has been dormant for a century. He was the Ice King. Nothing moved him. Then you show up with a mop and suddenly his heart rate is hitting 200 beats per minute and his testosterone levels are off the charts. If you're a null, he shouldn't be able to scent you at all. But he claims you smell like defiance?" "It's a very popular scent this season," I snapped. "Look, doctor, I have a new van to inspect and a corporate empire to clean. If Baron is having a biological meltdown, give him a sedative. I'm not a lab rat." I marched past him, heading for the stairs. I needed air. I needed to see if the heated seats in that van were actually real, or if I was hallucinating this entire 48-hour period. But as I reached the sidewalk, the black SUV was still there, and the window was rolling down. Baron was staring at me, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked annoyed, until he saw me. Then, the irritation vanished, replaced by that dark, shimmering intensity that made my stomach do a slow, traitorous roll. He hung up without saying a word. "The doctor is bothering you," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Your doctor is a loon," I said, pointing a finger at him. "He wants my blood. Tell him to get in line behind the mosquitoes." Baron opened the door and stepped out, his presence immediately making the sidewalk feel too small. He walked toward me, and despite every instinct I had to stand my ground, I felt the urge to lean into his heat. Eris is overexcited. He's never seen a bond defy the laws of science. But he's right about one thing. He stopped just inches away. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the thrum of his pulse. It was like standing near a high-voltage transformer. "I don't need your blood to know you're mine, Petra. I can feel you in the air. You're like a frequency only I can hear." "Then buy some noise-canceling headphones," I retorted, though my voice lacked its usual bite. "I signed the contract, Baron. That's all you get. Professionalism, boundaries. I'll be at your headquarters tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be weird about it." I turned and walked toward my new van, my heart hammering. I climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was soft, expensive, and smelled faintly of him, and pulled away from the curb without looking back. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I wasn't excited. But as I sat in my apartment that night looking at the Null 1 plates through the window, I realized I'd made a tactical error. I thought the contract was my shield. I thought it was a way to keep him at a distance. I didn't realize that for an alpha like Baron Maxwell, a contract wasn't a set of rules. It was an invitation to the hunt. The next morning, I arrived at Maxwell Global HQ. It was a glass and steel monolith that screamed power. I hauled my new industrial floor buffer out of the van, feeling like a warrior arming for battle. I was going to be the most professional cleaner this company had ever seen. I was going to be invisible. But when I stepped into the lobby, the entire security detail, 6 massive shifters in tactical gear, stopped and snapped to attention. "Ms. Creed," the lead guard said, bowing his head slightly. "The Alpha is expecting you. He's cleared the top 3 floors of all personnel," he said. "He didn't want anyone else breathing your air." I stared at the guard, my grip tightening on the handle of my buffer. "He did what?" "The top 3 floors are yours, ma'am," the guard repeated. "And he's requested you start in the executive gym. He said something about demonstrating his organization skills." I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. He was doing it again. He was playing games. I marched toward the elevators, my boots clicking rhythmically on the marble. If he wanted a demonstration, I'd give him one. I'd clean that gym so hard he'd be able to see his own obsessed reflection in every single weight plate. But when the elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, I didn't find an empty gym. I found Baron. He was shirtless, glistening with sweat, and mid-deadlift with a weight that would have crushed a normal man. He looked up as I entered, his muscles rippling under the harsh gym lights and a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "You're late, Petra," he rumbled, dropping the bar with a crash that shook the floor. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten cold feet." Chapter 5. The First Date, sort of. "I'm not late, I'm exactly on time," I said, my voice only trembling slightly as I shoved my cleaning cart into the room. I pointedly looked at his discarded shirt on the floor, then at the massive, sweat-slicked Alpha in front of me. "And I don't recall witnessing a workout being in the service agreement. Put a shirt on, Baron. You're violating the no-looming clause by just existing." Baron laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed off the glass walls. He grabbed a towel and wiped his face, but he didn't put the shirt on. He walked toward me, his movements fluid and dangerous, like a wolf stalking a very small, very angry bird. "The gym needs a deep clean, Ms. Creed," he said, his eyes dancing with mischief. "I'm just making sure you have enough to work with. Besides, I thought you liked hard work." "I like my hard work. I find yours to be an exercise in vanity," I snapped, reaching for my spray bottle. "Move. I need to sanitize the rack." Baron didn't move. He stood right in my path, smelling of salt, skin, and that intoxicating cedarwood scent. "We have a problem with the contract, Petra." I froze. "The ink isn't even dry." "What problem?" "The no mate talk during business hours clause," he said, leaning in. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. "Technically, it's only 7:55 a.m. Business hours don't start for another 5 minutes, which means for the next 300 seconds, I can say whatever I want." I looked at my watch. He was right. I'd arrived early to show off my work ethic, and he'd used it against me. "You're a devious, manipulative animal." "I'm a wolf," he corrected, his voice dropping to that low, resonant frequency. "And right now, that wolf is telling me that you didn't sleep much last night. You have a faint lavender scent under the lemon. You used the bath salts I left in the van's gift basket." My face went scarlet. I had used them. They smelled like a dream and made my skin feel like silk, but I wasn't about to admit he'd won that round. "I'm a fan of free samples. It doesn't mean anything." "It means you're starting to accept my presence in your life," he whispered. He reached out, his hand hovering near my waist, not touching, but the proximity was enough to make my breath hitch. "I'm going to make you an offer, Petra. A real one. No contracts, no lawyers. Just a meeting." "I'm already at a meeting. We're in a building called Maxwell Corporate. It's very corporate." "A dinner," he clarified. "Tonight. No alpha business, just 2 people eating food. If you enjoy yourself, we continue the contract as is. If you hate it, I'll double your rate and I'll never mention the bond again." I stared at him. You'd give up the fated mate thing? Just like that? Baron's expression softened, a rare flash of sincerity crossing his face. I won't give it up in my heart, but I'll stop harassing you with it. I want you to be here because you want to be, not because you're bound by some ancient magic you don't even believe in. One dinner, my treat, my territory, but your rules. It was the perfect out. I could go to one dinner, act completely bored, and walk away with double the pay and a silent alpha. It was the smartest business move I could make. But as I looked into those obsidian eyes, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't going for the money. I was going because when he looked at me like that, I felt like the only person in the world who actually mattered. Fine, I said, trying to sound bored. One dinner, but if you try to claim the dessert, the deal is off. Baron grinned, and for a moment, he looked less like a terrifying alpha and more like a man who had just won the lottery. 8 p.m., I'll send the car. I have my own van, thanks, I said, finally pushing my cart past him. Now get out. I have work to do. The rest of the day was a blur of high-intensity scrubbing. I cleaned those 3 floors until they sparkled like a diamond, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about the look in his eyes when he talked about the bond. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, I was standing in front of my mirror, wearing a dress I'd bought for a wedding I never went to. It was a deep, emerald green that made my eyes pop and hugged my curves in a way that felt dangerous. It's just a dinner, I told my reflection. You're a Null. You're immune. I drove myself to the address he'd sent, a private estate on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the penthouse. It was a sprawling, rustic manor made of stone and glass nestled in a forest of ancient pines. The front door was open. I stepped inside, my heels clicking on the stone floor. The house smelled like wood smoke and rain. Baron? I called out. In the kitchen. His voice drifted back. I walked toward the back of the house and stopped dead. Baron Maxwell, the billionaire alpha, was standing over a stove, wearing a dark apron over a white linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal thick, corded forearms. He was chopping garlic with a precision that was oddly mesmerizing. You're cooking? I asked, stunned. I told you, he said, looking up with a smirk. No alpha business, just a man making dinner for a woman who makes him want to be better. He walked over, taking a bottle of wine from the counter. He poured a glass and handed it to me. As our fingers touched, the spark was back, stronger than before. A jolt of pure energy that made my vision blur for a second. To new beginnings, he whispered, raising his glass. We sat on the back deck, the forest whispering around us. The food was incredible. Sea bass with a lemon butter sauce that he'd clearly made just to tease me. We didn't talk about shifters. We talked about my business, his love for ancient history, and how much we both hated the city's traffic. For the first time, I saw the man behind the wolf. He was funny, self-deprecating, and incredibly smart. I found myself laughing, actually laughing, and for a moment, I forgot who he was. But then, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the moon began to rise, a massive silver disk that turned the forest into a world of shadows. Baron's demeanor shifted. He went still, his eyes tracking something in the trees. His grip on his wine glass tightened. What is it? I asked, the hair on my neck standing up. Stay behind me, Petra, he said, his voice dropping into that primal alpha register. Baron, you promised no drama. This isn't drama, he growled, standing up and stepping in front of me. From the shadows of the pines, a dozen pairs of glowing eyes emerged. But they weren't wolves. They were men, large, scarred men in suits, led by a man with silver hair and a cold, calculating smile. Baron? The silver-haired man said, his voice like ice. The council heard you found something precious. A Null that smells like a queen. We thought we'd come and see if she's as immune as they say. Baron's growl was low and thunderous, his shoulders broadening as his shadow stretched across the deck. Step off my land, Victor. Now. The man named Victor looked at me, his eyes narrowing. She's a human, Baron. She doesn't belong to the pack laws, which means she's fair game for anyone who can take her. Chapter 6. Domestic Disturbance. Victor took a step onto the deck, his presence like a cold draft. He was an alpha. I could tell by the way the air seemed to sour around him, but he felt different than Baron. Where Baron was a roaring fire, Victor was a stagnant pond. Fair game? I said, stepping out from behind Baron's broad back before he could stop me. I held my wine glass like a gavel. I'm sorry, is this the part where I'm supposed to tremble? Because I have a very early shift tomorrow, and I really don't have time for a pissing contest. Victor froze, his eyes widening as he looked at me. He sniffed the air, his brow furrowing. I can't send her. She's empty. I'm not empty. I'm busy, I snapped. Baron, who is this person, and why is he ruining a perfectly good sea bass? Baron didn't look back at me, but I could see the muscles in his back twitching. Victor is the alpha of the Northern Ridge. He's also a man who has forgotten his manners. Victor, leave. This is a private dinner. Victor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A private dinner with a human Null? The council is worried, Baron. They think you're losing your edge. They think you've been blinded by a scent that doesn't even exist. He turned his gaze back to me, a cruel glint in his eyes. Tell me, human, does he treat you like a mate or a pet? I felt a flash of white-hot anger. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and Victor before Baron could intercept me. I was a head shorter than him, but in that moment I felt 10 feet tall. He treats me like a woman who owns her own company, I said, my voice low and dangerous. And if you don't get your muddy shoes off this deck in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to show you exactly how immune I am. I've dealt with aggressive stains my whole life, Victor. You're just another blotch I need to scrub out. Victor's eyes flared. He let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound designed to make any human's heart stop from sheer terror. It was a dominance roar, the ultimate alpha weapon. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom. Is that it? My neighbor's chihuahua has a more intimidating bark. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crickets in the woods seemed to stop. Baron let out a sharp, surprised breath that sounded suspiciously like a suppressed laugh. Victor looked like he'd been slapped. His power, the thing that defined his entire existence, had just bounced off me like water off a duck's back. He looked at Baron, then back at me, his face twisting with a mix of fear and fury. She's a freak, Victor hissed. She's a vacuum in the world. You're mating with a ghost, Maxwell. I'm mating with the strongest woman I've ever met, Baron growled, stepping forward and placing a hand on my shoulder. The touch was light, but it felt like a stamp of ownership that I surprisingly didn't want to fight. And if you ever speak to her like that again, I won't just banish you from my lands. I'll dismantle your pack brick by brick. Get out. Victor backed away, his eyes never leaving mine. He and his men melted back into the shadows of the pines, but the air stayed cold long after they were gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and slumped slightly. Well, that was a mood killer. Baron turned to me, his eyes glowing with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. He didn't look angry. He looked mesmerized. You didn't flinch. He roared at you with the power of an alpha, and you didn't even blink. I told you, Baron, I'm a Null. Your voodoo doesn't work on me. It's not just being a Null, he whispered, his hand sliding from my shoulder to my cheek. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending sparks dancing across my skin. It's you. You have a spine of titanium, Petra Creed. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The smell of cedarwood and the cool night air was overwhelming. I was going to wait. I was going to be professional, but after seeing you stand up to him... Baron, I breathed, my hands finding the lapels of his apron. The dinner deal. You said if I enjoyed myself. Did you? He asked, his voice a low rumble against my skin. The sea bass was excellent, I whispered, and the company wasn't as annoying as I expected. He didn't wait for another word. He tilted his head and captured my lips with his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the taste of wine and garlic and a century of waiting. It was the feeling of his heartbeat against mine, a frantic, thunderous rhythm that told me everything he couldn't say. I pulled him closer, my fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. For a moment, the world disappeared. There were no alphas, no nulls, no contracts, just the heat of him and the way he made me feel like I was finally, truly alive. He pulled back, breathless, his eyes searching mine. Petra... But he was cut off by the sound of my phone screaming in my pocket. I ignored it, but it rang again and again. I pulled it out, annoyed. It was a FaceTime call from my office manager, Sarah. I answered it, ready to scold her for interrupting. Sarah, this better be a fire. Petra... Sarah's face appeared on the screen, her eyes wide with terror. She was in my office above the laundromat. Behind her, the door was hanging off its hinges, and the walls were covered in a strange, glowing substance. They came for the files. They took everything. The contracts, the client lists, the samples of your miracle mist. Who? I demanded, my grip tightening on the phone. I don't know, she sobbed, but they left a message on your desk. It's written in... I think it's blood, Petra. Sarah turned the camera toward the desk. Scrawled across my professional calendar in dark, jagged letters were 3 words. The ghost belongs to us. Chapter 7. The Scent Lock. The ghost belongs to us. The words on the screen felt like a cold bucket of slush poured down my spine. I stared at the jagged, dark lettering on my desk, my mind already calculating the cost of the damage and the security breach. My miracle mist wasn't just a cleaner. It was my life's work, a chemical formula that could bridge the gap between human and shifter environments. If someone had the samples, they had my future. Baron's hand was suddenly on the back of my neck, his touch grounded and searingly hot. He had seen the screen. The air around him didn't just turn cold, it turned lethal. The charming chef from 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by the Obsidian Alpha. Sarah, Baron said, his voice a low, vibrating frequency that seemed to calm my manager through the phone. Lock yourself in the back break room. My security team is 3 minutes away. Do not open the door for anyone but a man named Silas. He will say the word Obsidian. Do you understand? Sarah nodded frantically and the call cut out. Victor, I hissed, looking at Baron. He left 5 minutes ago. He must have sent his team the second he realized I was a null. It wasn't Victor, Baron growled, already pulling his phone out and barking orders to a tactical team. Victor is a bully, but he's not organized. That message, that's the work of the Syndicate. They're a group of rogue shifters who believe humans shouldn't have access to shifter-grade technology. They see your formula as a threat to their biological superiority. It's a degreaser, Baron. It's not a weapon. I paced the deck, my heels clicking like gunfire. And they trashed my office. They touched my files. They touched you, Baron corrected, his eyes flashing obsidian. He stepped in front of me, his hands catching my shoulders. Petra, listen to me. They didn't just want the formula. They want the ghost. They realized what I realized, that you are the only variable in this city they can't control. You aren't going back to that apartment tonight. Oh, no. No way. I tried to pull back, but his grip was firm. I don't do the damsel in a tower bit. I have a business to salvage. I have insurance adjusters to call. You have a target on your back, he countered. They think you belong to them. I think you belong to no one but yourself, but I'm the only one with a private security force large enough to keep them from proving me wrong. The rain started then. Not a drizzle, but a sudden, violent downpour that hammered against the forest canopy. The wind whipped my emerald dress around my legs, and for the first time in my life, I felt small. Not because of the wolves, but because of the sheer scale of the mess I was in. "I'm not staying in your penthouse, Baron. It's a fishbowl." "I know," he said, his voice softening. He looked back at the rustic manor behind us. "That's why we're staying here. This house is off the grid. The walls are reinforced with lead and silver. Even a Syndicate tracker can't scent through them. We stay here, under scent lock, until my team finds them." I looked at the house, then at the rain, then at the man who was currently offering me the only safety I had left. My pride was screaming, but my survival instinct was louder. "Fine," I snapped, pointing a finger at his chest. "But I'm still charging you for the deep clean on that gym, and if you so much as mention the word mate while we're trapped in here, I'm going to find where you keep your expensive scotch, and I'm going to pour it down the drain." Baron's lips quirked into a grim, dark smile. "Deal, now get inside. You're shivering." As we stepped back into the warmth of the stone manor, the heavy front door thudded shut with a sound that felt very, very permanent. Baron engaged the lockdown, and I heard the hum of a high-tech security system activating. We were trapped, together, in a house that smelled like him, while a pack of rogues hunted for my blood. "Petra," Baron said, turning to me in the dim hallway. The intensity in his eyes hadn't faded. If anything, the scent lock was making the air between us thick enough to taste. "There's something you should know about this house." "What? Is it haunted? Does the fridge only stock raw meat?" "No," he whispered, stepping closer. "It's built on a ley line. For shifters, it's like an amplifier. It takes every emotion, every instinct, and it turns the volume up to 10. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my waist. The heat was unbearable. "I can hear your heart, Petra," he rasped. "And right now, it's telling me you aren't nearly as annoyed as you're pretending to be." Chapter 8. The Vulnerability. The ley line was no joke. Within an hour of being locked inside the manor, the air felt like it was charged with static electricity. Every time I brushed past a piece of furniture, I got a spark. Every time Baron walked into a room, the pressure in my chest increased until I felt like I was underwater. I found myself in the library, a massive room filled with leather-bound books and a fireplace that Baron had roared to life. I was trying to focus on my digital backups, but the screen was a blur. Baron walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. He'd changed into a simple black t-shirt and sweats, and without the suit, he looked less like a mogul and more like a mountain. He set a mug down in front of me. "Chamomile," he said. "For the nerves." "My nerves are fine. My rage, however, is peaking," I said, though I took the tea. The heat felt good against my cold fingers. "Why are you doing this, Baron? And don't give me the fated mate speech. Why spend all this capital on a human who cleans your floors?" Baron sat in the armchair opposite me, his large frame dwarfing the furniture. He stared into the fire, the orange light dancing in his obsidian eyes. "Because for 100 years I've been a protector who had nothing to protect but a balance sheet," he said quietly. "Being an alpha isn't about the roar, Petra. It's about the weight. Every life in the Obsidian Pack is my responsibility. Their hunger is mine, their grief is mine. It's a very loud way to live." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion behind the power. And then I walked into my hallway and smelled lemon and eucalyptus, and beneath that, I smelled a woman who didn't want anything from me. "You didn't want my protection. You didn't want my money. You just wanted the ink out of the rug." He let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh. "You were the only quiet thing in my world. My wolf didn't just scent a mate. He scented peace." I looked down at my tea, my chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with ley lines. I've spent my whole life trying to be loud enough that people wouldn't look through me. Being a Null, you're a ghost in your own city. People forget you're in the room. They talk over you. I built my business so I'd have a name that people had to respect. "I see you, Petra," he whispered. "I don't just scent you. I see the woman who stayed up until 3 a.m., perfecting a formula because she refused to be average. I see the woman who looked Victor in the eye and told him he was a blotch. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The Syndicate wants you because you're a breakthrough. I want you because you're the first person in a century who made me feel like Baron, not just the Alpha. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For the first time, the Null and the Alpha were just a man and a woman sitting by a fire. I'm still not moving into the penthouse, I said, though the fire in my voice was more of a simmer now. I know, he smiled, but you might have to accept a permanent security detail. I've already picked out the guards. They're all very polite, and they've been told that if they loom even once, you'll make them polish the van with a toothbrush. I laughed, a real, genuine sound that seemed to break the tension in the room. Baron's eyes softened, and he reached out, his hand covering mine on the table. This time, I didn't pull away. His skin was like a sun-warmed stone, and the spark that jumped between us was a steady, humming warmth. We'll find them, Petra, he promised, and I'll make sure they never touch your office again. I can handle the Syndicate, I said, my fierce edge returning. But Baron, what happens if the Null thing isn't just a biological glitch? What if I'm something else? Then we'll figure it out together, he said. He stood up, pulling me with him. The proximity was electric. He looked down at me, his gaze dropping to my lips. The almost kiss from the kitchen was back, but this time there were no phones to interrupt us. He leaned in, his breath warm against my mouth. But before he could close the gap, the house's alarm system let out a single piercing chirp. Baron went rigid. He turned toward the window, his nostrils flaring. What is it? I whispered. The perimeter hasn't been breached, he said, his voice turning cold as ice. But there's someone at the gate. One person, and Petra. They don't have a scent, either. Chapter 9. The Null Secret. I felt the blood drain from my face. Another Null? I thought we were 1 in a million. You are, Baron said, already moving toward the security monitors in the hallway, which makes this a very targeted arrival. I followed him to the bank of screens. In the grainy black and white infrared of the front gate, a figure stood in the pouring rain. It was a woman, slight and dressed in a heavy trench coat. She wasn't moving. She was just staring directly into the camera lens as if she could see us on the other side. Open the gate, Baron, I said, my heart pounding. Absolutely not. It's a trap. Look at her. I pointed to the screen. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, familiar object. She held it up to the camera. It was a bottle of Petra's Miracle Mist. But the label was different. It was old, faded, and yellowed, with a logo I hadn't used in years. That's my mother's handwriting, I whispered. Baron's jaw tightened, but he hit the release. We watched as the woman walked up the long, winding drive. Baron stood in front of the door, his hand resting on the latch, his body a coiled spring of alpha muscle. If she moves an inch toward you, I'm putting her through the wall, he warned. Just open it. He pulled the door open. The woman stepped inside, dripping wet, her boots leaving puddles on the stone. She pushed back her hood, revealing a face that looked like a mirror of my own, 20 years older. Her eyes were a piercing, familiar gray. Petra, she said, her voice raspy. You've been very hard to find. The Maxwell scent lock is quite effective. Who are you? I demanded, my hands shaking. The woman looked at Baron, her gaze unimpressed. An alpha mate. My. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, just like your father. She turned back to me. I'm Juliana. I'm the person who taught your mother how to brew that cleaner you're so proud of. And we need to leave, now. I'm not going anywhere until you explain how you're a Null, I snapped. Juliana let out a short, bitter laugh. We aren't Nulls, Petra. We're voids. A Null is a human with no scent. A void is a shifter whose scent is so powerful it creates a vacuum. It pulls in everything around it. Emotions, power, magic. You aren't invisible to Baron because you're human. You're his mate because you're the only thing on this earth that can contain his power without breaking." She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a sudden silver light. "The Syndicate isn't looking for your formula, Petra. They're looking for the void key. They think if they can harvest your blood, they can strip every alpha in the city of their power, and they're already at the perimeter." As if on cue, a massive explosion rocked the manor. The lights flickered and died, leaving us in the red glow of the emergency power. From the woods, a chorus of howls broke out. Not the rhythmic howls of a pack, but the jagged, hungry screams of a hunting party. "The scent lock is down," Juliana said, pulling a heavy, silver-edged canister from her coat. "And Baron, they brought a Null scream generator. You won't be able to shift." Baron tried to lunge forward, but he stumbled, his hand clutching his head as a high-frequency whine began to vibrate through the walls. He fell to one knee, his face contorted in agony. I looked at the woman who claimed to be my kin, then at the man I was starting to love who was currently paralyzed by a sound I couldn't even hear. "How do I stop it?" I yelled over the alarm. Juliana handed me the canister. "You're a void, Petra. You don't just scrub stains. You scrub the air. Open your lungs and take the sound. Pull it into the vacuum." I looked at the canister, then at the shattered front door where the first of the Syndicate rogues was stepping through the smoke. I didn't know how to be a void. I didn't know how to take the sound, but I knew how to protect what was mine. I stepped over Baron, facing the doorway, as the lead rogue, a massive wolf with a scarred eye, snarled at me. "The girl is the key," the rogue growled. "Grab her and kill the wolf." I didn't reach for a weapon. I didn't reach for a spray bottle. I closed my eyes and reached for the silence that had lived in my chest my entire life. "You want the ghost?" I whispered, my voice echoing with a power that wasn't mine, yet was entirely me. "Come and get it." The rogue leapt, but as he hit the threshold, the air around me didn't just move. It vanished. Chapter 10. The public debut. The air didn't just leave the room, it died. When the lead rogue lunged at me, his claws extended and his eyes glowing with predatory intent, he hit a wall of absolute nothingness. I didn't push him back. I simply opened the vacuum Juliana had described, and the sound, the momentum, and even the smell of the room were sucked into a singular, crushing point of silence. The rogue hit the floor like a sack of wet sand, his mouth moving in a silent scream, his ears bleeding from the sudden, total lack of atmospheric pressure. Behind him, his companions skidded to a halt, their faces twisting in confusion. They were predators who relied on sensory input to hunt, and I had just turned the world into a sensory deprivation tank. I felt a sharp, icy pull in my chest, a hollow ache that wanted to consume everything in the hallway. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. It felt like the ultimate deep clean. "Petra!" Baron's voice broke through the silence, sounding muffled as if he were underwater. The high-frequency whine of the Null scream generator sputtered and died. With the noise gone, Baron surged to his feet. He didn't shift. The generator had done its damage to his equilibrium, but he didn't need to. He moved like a shadow, his fists finding the remaining rogues with a brutal, silent efficiency. Within seconds, the doorway was clear of anyone standing. I slumped against the wall, my lungs burning. The void closed and the world rushed back in, the smell of ozone, the sound of the rain, the frantic beating of my own heart. "What did you do?" Baron rasped, reaching me in 2 strides. He checked me for injuries, his hands trembling as they brushed my arms. "I took the trash out," I whispered, though my knees felt like they were made of liquid. Juliana stepped over the unconscious rogue, her expression unreadable. "You did more than that. You claimed the space, but you can't stay here. The Syndicate knows you can fight back now, which means they won't send foot soldiers next time. They'll send the Council." "The Council?" I looked at Baron. "I thought you were the boss." "I'm an alpha, not a king," Baron said, his eyes darkening. "The Council of Alphas oversees pack law. If they believe a void has emerged, especially one who isn't bound by pack loyalty. They'll declare you a public threat. They'll try to contain you in a high-security facility. Over my dead body, I snapped, my fierce edge returning. I have a business to run. I'm not being contained anywhere. Then we have to go on the offensive, Juliana said, looking at the two of us. There is a gala tomorrow night. Every alpha in the tri-state area will be there. Baron, you were supposed to announce your mate. Instead, you're going to announce a partnership. You're going to introduce Petra not as your human consort, but as a void architect. You make her look like a strategic asset, not a biological weapon. I looked at my emerald dress, now ruined by soot and rain. A gala? I've spent my life avoiding these people. Now I'm supposed to walk into the lion's den and pretend I'm a void architect? It's a fancy name for what you already do, Petra, Baron said, his hand finding mine. You control the environment. You fix the things that are broken. Only this time, the stains we're cleaning are political. And if it doesn't work? Baron leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The heat of him was the only thing keeping me grounded. Then we burn the building down and leave. But no one, and I mean no one, is putting you in a cage. I took a shaky breath and nodded. Fine. But I'm picking my own outfit. And if anyone calls me a pet, I'm sucking the oxygen out of the ballroom. The next 24 hours were a blur of tactical planning and high-stakes tailoring. I didn't want a gown. I wanted armor. I worked with Baron's personal stylist to create a suit of charcoal silk so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. It had sharp lapels, a tapered waist, and hidden pockets for my upgraded miracle mist, now fortified with Juliana's silver dust compound. As we stood at the entrance of the grand Obsidian ballroom, the hum of shifter royalty on the other side of the doors was a physical weight. Baron was in a matching black suit, his alpha aura suppressed, but still simmering just beneath the surface. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. No, I said, adjusting my cuffs, but I've never seen a mess I couldn't handle. The doors swung open. The music didn't stop, but the air changed. Hundreds of eyes turned toward us, shifters of every rank, their nostrils flaring as they tried to scent the woman on the alpha's arm. We walked into the center of the room, and I could hear the whispers. Human. Null. Weakness. Baron led me to the raised dais where the High Council sat. 3 ancient, scarred alphas who looked like they hadn't smiled since the 19th century. The leader, a man named Silas with eyes like cold flint, leaned forward. Baron Maxwell, Silas rumbled. You bring a human to a sacred gathering. Explain this insult. Baron didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on my hand and looked Silas in the eye. I don't bring a human. I bring the CEO of Elite Spickspan and the first void of our generation. And she has a proposal for the council. I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs, and looked at the most powerful men in the world. Actually, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence, I have an invoice for every secret you've been trying to hide in the dark. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, glowing vial, the liquid Juliana had given me. But before I could speak, the doors at the back of the hall exploded. Chapter 11. The Shark Tank. The explosion didn't come from a bomb. It was a roar, a sound so deep and resonant it shattered the crystal chandeliers and sent the lower-ranked wolves to their knees. Victor, the alpha from the woods, marched into the room, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 6 men in white lab coats, the Syndicate's doctors. The council is being lied to, Victor roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. That woman isn't an architect, she's a thief. She stole a formula from my lands and she's using it to mask her scent. She's a human pretender playing God. Silas, the High Council leader, stood up, his eyes flashing silver. Victor, you interrupt a sacred assembly, explain yourself or face the consequences. I have the proof, Victor shouted, gesturing to the doctors. One of them stepped forward, holding a device that looked like a high-tech Geiger counter. This device detects void shifter signatures. If she is what Baron claims, it will hum. If she is a human using chemicals, it will remain silent. Baron stepped in front of me, his hand going to the inside of his jacket. This is an ambush. Silas, Victor has been conspiring with the Syndicate to destabilize my pack. Let the test proceed, Silas commanded, his voice like iron. If she is a void, she has nothing to fear. If she is a fraud, she belongs to Victor's pack for judgment. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. Baron looked back at me, his eyes full of a frantic, silent warning. We both knew the truth. I was a void, but I had no idea how to trigger the signature on command. It was an instinct, not a light switch. The doctor approached me, the device clicking like a hungry insect. He held it up to my chest. Silence. The device didn't hum. It didn't glow. It stayed as dead as a rock. A murmur went through the crowd. Victor's face split into a triumphant, jagged grin. See? A human! A fraud! She's been using Baron's influence to line her pockets and insult our traditions. Baron moved to grab the doctor, but two council guards, massive wolves in ceremonial armor, stepped into his path. Stand down, Maxwell, Silas warned. The test has spoken. Victor walked toward the dais, his eyes fixed on me with a terrifying, predatory hunger. By the laws of the Assembly, she is mine to dispose of. For the crime of deception against the High Council, I claim the human Petra Creed. He reached for my arm, his fingers closing around my wrists like a vice. Get your hands off me, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a sudden, sharp heat. You're nothing now, little ghost, Victor hissed, leaning down so only I could hear him. I'm going to break you until you tell me where the formula is, and then I'm going to watch Baron howl while I... He never finished the sentence. Because at that moment, I didn't just feel the void, I became it. I didn't pull away. I reached out and grabbed his wrist back. Rule number 6, I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from everywhere at once. Don't touch the equipment. The device in the doctor's hand didn't just hum. It screamed. A blinding silver light erupted from my chest, surging through my arm and into Victor's body. He didn't just let go, he was catapulted backward, his body hitting the marble floor with a sickening thud. The silver light didn't stop. It spiraled out from me in a silent wave, hitting every shifter in the room. It didn't hurt them, but it did something far more effective. It silenced their wolves. The glowing eyes in the room extinguished like blown-out candles. The alpha auras vanished. For a heartbeat, the grand ballroom was filled with nothing but hundreds of very confused, very human-feeling people. I stood in the center of the chaos, the charcoal silk of my suit shimmering with a lingering silver frost. My gray eyes were now solid chrome. I looked at Silas, who was clutching the edge of his table, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. The test seems to have a malfunction, I said, my voice perfectly clear in the stunned silence. Would you like to try again? Or should we talk about Victor's ties to the Syndicate now? Silas looked at the unconscious Victor, then at the terrified doctors, and finally at me. He bowed his head, just an inch, but it was enough to send a shockwave through the room. The Council acknowledges the void, he whispered. But as the silver light faded from my eyes, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my side. I looked down. A small pneumatic dart was sticking out of my waist, the glass vial attached to it already empty. I looked at the doctor who had held the device. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his watch. 10 seconds, he whispered. Chapter 12. The Rival's Mistake. The world didn't go dark. It went loud. Every sound in the ballroom, the rustle of silk, the gasping breath of the council, the hum of the air conditioning, magnified until it felt like a physical blow. The void didn't just retreat, it collapsed. The dart hadn't been filled with poison. It was filled with a concentrated sensory stimulant designed to overload a shifter's nervous system. For a normal wolf, it would be a headache. For a void, whose entire power relied on silence and containment, it was like someone had detonated a flashbang inside my skull. I stumbled, my hand flying to my side to yank the dart out, but my fingers felt like lead. Petra. Baron was at my side in an instant, his arms catching me before I hit the floor. He looked at the dart, his face contorting in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What did you do to her?" The doctor backed away, a cold, clinical smile on his face. "The void is a vacuum, Maxwell. If you fill a vacuum with enough noise, it shatters. Her signature is officially scrambled. She's no longer a void architect. She's just a human in a very expensive suit, and her brain is currently being fried by her own senses." Victor groaned on the floor, shaking his head as his wolf eyes flickered back to life. He saw me slumped in Baron's arms and let out a jagged, bloody laugh. "Now, while she's down, she's an abomination! Kill the wolf and take the girl!" The ballroom erupted into chaos. Victor's hidden Syndicate supporters pulled weapons, not guns or knives, but silver-tipped batons and high-frequency emitters. The council guards hesitated, caught between their loyalty to Silas and the biological terror of a void in the room. Baron didn't hesitate. He pulled me against his chest, his body shielding mine as he let out a roar that actually cracked the marble floor beneath us. It wasn't a roar of dominance. It was a roar of war. "Silas!" Baron bellowed over the screaming of the censors. "If you ever want to see the Obsidian Pack honor the council again, you will clear this room of Syndicate filth." Silas looked at me, shaking, my eyes rolled back as I tried to process the sound of 1,000 heartbeats at once, and then at the rogue doctors. He raised a hand, and the council guards finally moved, their armored forms clashing with Victor's men in a sea of snarling and silver. "We have to get her out of here," a voice hissed. Juliana appeared from the shadows behind the dais, her eyes wide with alarm. She grabbed my hand, her void presence acting like a small cooling balm against the fire in my head. "The stimulant is tailored to her DNA. If she stays in this crowd, the sensory input will kill her." "To the roof," Baron commanded, scooping me up in his arms as if I weighed nothing. "Silas, hold the line." We ran. Or rather, Baron ran, his boots thundering up the grand staircase while Juliana cleared the path with canisters of her silver dust compound. I clung to Baron's neck, my face buried in the crook of his shoulder. His scent, cedarwood, rain, and fierce, protective heat, was the only thing I could focus on. It was a singular note in the middle of a screaming orchestra. We reached the roof, the cool night air hitting me like a physical relief. The rain was back, washing over my face, and for a second, the noise in my head dialed down from a 10 to a 7. Baron set me down against the stone parapet, his hands cupping my face. "Look at me, Petra. Focus on my voice. Just my voice." "It's too loud," I gasped, tears leaking from my eyes. "I can hear the city. I can hear the bugs in the grass. I can hear your blood, Baron. It's so loud." "Focus on the lemon," he whispered, his forehead pressing against mine. "Think about the rug. Think about the invoice. Think about the way you looked at me when I broke your door." I let out a ragged laugh, my fingers digging into his shoulders. You were an idiot." "I am an idiot," he agreed, his eyes glowing with a soft amber light. "But I'm your idiot. Stay with me, Petra." The roof door behind us was kicked open. Victor stepped out, his suit torn, his face a mask of bloody, desperate rage. He wasn't alone. He was holding a remote trigger in his hand. "You think a rooftop will save you?" Victor spat. "The Syndicate didn't just want the girl. They wanted the pack. I've wired the foundation of this building with scent bombs. In 10 seconds, I release a concentrated pheromone that will drive every wolf in that ballroom into a blood frenzy. They'll tear each other apart. And you'll get to watch your empire burn while she dies of a sensory heart attack." Baron moved to spring, but Victor raised the trigger. "One step, Maxwell," and I press it. I looked at Victor, then at the city lights, then at the man holding me. The noise was still there, but beneath it, I felt something else. A deep, resonant hum. "The building," I whispered, my voice sounding strange even to me. "I can feel the building." "Petra, no," Juliana warned. "You can't contain that much energy in your state." "I'm not going to contain it," I said, pushing myself up from the wall. My legs were shaking, but the void was waking up again, not as a vacuum, but as a conductor. I looked at Victor and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You forgot one thing about a deep clean, Victor," I said, stepping toward him as the silver light began to leak from my fingertips. "Sometimes you have to flush the pipes." I reached out and grabbed the stone of the parapet, opening every sense I had. I didn't pull the noise in. I pushed it out. I used my body as a bridge, channeling the sensory overload, the high-frequency whines, and the city's electricity directly into the building's structure. The roof vibrated. The scent bombs in the basement didn't detonate, they short-circuited. The trigger in Victor's hand turned red-hot and melted into his palm. But as the energy surged through me, a dark, black shadow detached itself from the forest below and soared toward the roof. It wasn't a wolf. It was a massive, winged creature with eyes like burning coals. "The Overseer!" Juliana gasped, her face turning white. "They sent the Overseer." The creature slammed into the roof, its impact sending us all flying. It landed between us and the door, its massive wings blocking out the moon. It didn't look at Victor or Baron. It looked directly at me. "The void belongs to the void," the creature rumbled, its voice sounding like grinding stones. And then, it didn't attack. It bowed. Chapter 13. The Primal Recognition. The Overseer didn't move like a living thing. It moved like a shadow cast by a dying sun, its massive, leathery wings folding against its back with the sound of a closing tomb. Victor, who had been screaming about empires and blood frenzies only seconds ago, scrambled backward until he hit the parapet, his face drained of color. "The Overseer," Victor whispered, his voice cracking. I called for the Syndicate's backup, not the Ancient." The creature ignored him. Its eyes, vast pits of burning amber, stayed fixed on me. It had landed with enough force to crack the roof's concrete, yet as it bowed, its movement was as silent as the vacuum I'd created in the ballroom. "The void belongs to the void," it rumbled again. The sound didn't hit my ears. It resonated in the hollow space behind my ribs. Baron was on his feet in a heartbeat, his claws unsheathed and his body positioned squarely between me and the creature. Even in his weakened, sensory-overloaded state, the alpha in him was ready to take on a nightmare to protect me. "Step back from her," Baron growled, his voice thick with a primal, protective menace. "I don't care if you're a myth or a machine. She isn't yours." The Overseer tilted its head, a slow, clicking movement. "Alpha of the Obsidian, you misunderstand. We do not come to claim the girl. We come to acknowledge the return of the balance." I pushed myself up, using Baron's shoulder for leverage. My head was still spinning from the sensory flush, but the noise was fading, replaced by a deep rhythmic thrumming that seemed to beat in time with the creature's eyes. "The balance?" I asked, my voice steadying. "I'm a cleaning professional with a very long to-do list. I don't do balance, I do order." "Order is the illusion of the weak," the Overseer replied. "Balance is the truth of the void. For 1,000 years, the shifters have grown loud. Their scents have choked the world. Their power has tipped the scales. You are the correction, Petra Creed. You are the silence that allows the world to hear itself again." Juliana stepped forward, her silver-gray eyes wide. The legends were true. The voids aren't a biological glitch. They're a survival mechanism of the earth itself. Victor saw his opening. While the creature was focused on us, he reached for a backup detonator hidden in his sleeve. "I don't care about balance. I care about power. If I can't have the void, I'll bury you all. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. No explosion, no scent bombs, not even a spark. I looked at Victor, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the silver light in my veins. I told you, Victor. I flushed the pipes. Your toys are broken. Your syndicate is done. And frankly, your lack of original strategy is insulting. The overseer's eyes flared. In a movement too fast for the human, or even the shifter, eye to follow, it swept a wing across the roof. Victor was swiped off his feet, pinned against the stone by a pressure that looked like gravity itself had intensified. The usurper is a stain, the overseer said, looking at me. Shall we remove it? I looked at Victor, who was currently hyperventilating under the weight of an ancient shadow. Then I looked at Baron. He was watching me, his eyes full of a new kind of intensity. He wasn't looking at a damsel anymore. He was looking at a force of nature. No, I said, my voice ringing out across the rooftop. We don't kill him. That's too easy. We hand him to the council. Let him explain to every alpha in that ballroom why he tried to turn their blood into a weapon. Let him be the one who has to live with being a Null for the rest of his life. A Null? Victor gasped, struggling to breathe. The energy I pushed through the building, I explained, leaning down to look him in the eye. It didn't just short-circuit the bombs, it short-circuited you. You wanted to see if I was a fraud, Victor. Now you get to find out what it's like to have no wolf at all. Consider it a professional courtesy. The overseer let out a sound like a grinding tectonic plate, a laugh. It retracted its wing, leaving a shivering, scentless Victor curled on the floor. The void has spoken, the creature said. It turned its gaze to Baron. Take care of her, Obsidian. The world is about to get very quiet, and she will need a voice to remind her why she stays. With a single powerful beat of its wings, the overseer vaulted into the night, disappearing into the clouds before the first drop of rain could hit its back. Silence returned to the roof, but it wasn't the heavy, crushing silence of a vacuum. It was the peaceful, clean silence of a job well done. Baron turned to me, his hands finding my waist. He didn't say anything at first, he just looked at me, his amber eyes searching mine. You're a void architect, he whispered, his thumb brushing the line of my jaw. And a revolutionary. And apparently, the Earth's personal janitor. I'm still Petra, I said, reaching up to straighten his tie, which was crooked from the fight. And I still expect you to pay for the cleaning of this roof. There's soot everywhere. Baron laughed, the sound warm and vibrant against the cool night air. He leaned down, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that tasted like victory and rain. I'll pay whatever you want, he murmured against my mouth. As long as you stay. I pulled back, a smirk playing on my lips. We'll see. I still have a business to rebuild, and I think I'm going to need a bigger van. But as we turned to head back to the ballroom to face the council, Juliana's voice stopped us. She was standing by the roof door, staring at the glowing vial I'd dropped during the fight. Petra, she said, her voice trembling. The overseer. It didn't just come to acknowledge you. Look at the horizon. I turned. In the distance, across the city skyline, dozens of silver lights were beginning to flicker to life. In every penthouse, every slum, and every pack house, the Nulls weren't just invisible anymore. They were waking up. Chapter 14. The Balcony Confession. The gala was no longer a party, it was a crime scene transition. As Baron and I walked back down the grand staircase, the atmosphere was thick with a brand of tension I hadn't encountered before. Total, unadulterated awe. The alphas who had spent the last hour trying to dominate the room were now standing in small, hushed groups, watching us as if we were royalty returning from the dead. Silas met us at the base of the stairs. He looked older, his face etched with the reality of what he'd just witnessed. Behind him, Victor was being led away in silver-lined cuffs by council guards. Victor looked smaller, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal, the biological static I'd left in his system making him twitch. "Maxwell," Silas said, bowing his head deeply. Then he turned to me. "Ms. Creed, the council has much to discuss. Your actions tonight saved the lineage of a dozen packs, but the light we saw on the horizon— It's not just me anymore, is it?" I asked, my voice echoing in the marble hall. "The void has been dormant for a millennium," Juliana said, stepping up beside me. She looked out the glass walls of the ballroom at the silver pinpricks of light across the city. "It's a chain reaction. Petra triggered the first dome, and now the rest of the voids are coming online. The world is resetting." The room erupted into murmurs. For the Alphas, this was a nightmare, a world where their power could be neutralized by the very people they had ignored for centuries. But for me, it felt like the ultimate level playing field. "I need air," I whispered to Baron. He didn't ask questions. He led me away from the council, through the stunned crowd, and out onto the massive stone balcony that overlooked the Obsidian Packlands. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and smelling of pine and wet stone. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the forest. My hands were finally steady, but the silver hum in my blood was still there, a quiet reminder that I wasn't just a girl with a spray bottle anymore. Baron stood behind me, his heat a constant grounding presence. He didn't try to alpha me. He didn't try to claim the moment. He just existed with me in the silence. "You're thinking about the business," he said, his voice a low, knowing rumble. Baron was on his feet in a heartbeat, his claws unsheathed and his body positioned squarely between me and the creature. Even in his weakened, sensory-overloaded state, the alpha in him was ready to take on a nightmare to protect me. "Step back from her," Baron growled, his voice thick with a primal, protective menace. "I don't care if you're a myth or a machine. She isn't yours." The overseer tilted its head, a slow, clicking movement. "Alpha of the Obsidian, you misunderstand. We do not come to claim the girl. We come to acknowledge the return of the balance." I pushed myself up, using Baron's shoulder for leverage. My head was still spinning from the sensory flush, but the noise was fading, replaced by a deep rhythmic thrumming that seemed to beat in time with the creature's eyes. "The balance?" I asked, my voice steadying. "I'm a cleaning professional with a very long to-do list. I don't do balance, I do order." "Order is the illusion of the weak," the overseer replied. "Balance is the truth of the void. For 1,000 years, the shifters have grown loud. Their scents have choked the world. Their power has tipped the scales. You are the correction, Petra Creed. You are the silence that allows the world to hear itself again." Juliana stepped forward, her silver-gray eyes wide. The legends were true. The voids aren't a biological glitch. They're a survival mechanism of the earth itself. Victor saw his opening. While the creature was focused on us, he reached for a backup detonator hidden in his sleeve. "I don't care about balance. I care about power. If I can't have the void, I'll bury you all." He pressed the button. Nothing happened. No explosion, no scent bombs, not even a spark. I looked at Victor, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the silver light in my veins. "I told you, Victor. I flushed the pipes. Your toys are broken. Your syndicate is done. And frankly, your lack of original strategy is insulting." The overseer's eyes flared. In a movement too fast for the human, or even the shifter, eye to follow, it swept a wing across the roof. Victor was swiped off his feet, pinned against the stone by a pressure that looked like gravity itself had intensified. "The usurper is a stain," the overseer said, looking at me. "Shall we remove it?" I looked at Victor, who was currently hyperventilating under the weight of an ancient shadow. Then I looked at Baron. He was watching me, his eyes full of a new kind of intensity. He wasn't looking at a damsel anymore. He was looking at a force of nature. "No," I said, my voice ringing out across the rooftop. "We don't kill him. That's too easy. We hand him to the council. Let him explain to every alpha in that ballroom why he tried to turn their blood into a weapon. Let him be the one who has to live with being a Null for the rest of his life. A Null? Victor gasped, struggling to breathe. The energy I pushed through the building, I explained, leaning down to look him in the eye. It didn't just short-circuit the bombs, it short-circuited you. You wanted to see if I was a fraud, Victor. Now you get to find out what it's like to have no wolf at all. Consider it a professional courtesy. The overseer let out a sound like a grinding tectonic plate, a laugh. It retracted its wing, leaving a shivering, scentless Victor curled on the floor. The void has spoken, the creature said. It turned its gaze to Baron. Take care of her, Obsidian. The world is about to get very quiet, and she will need a voice to remind her why she stays. With a single powerful beat of its wings, the overseer vaulted into the night, disappearing into the clouds before the first drop of rain could hit its back. Silence returned to the roof, but it wasn't the heavy, crushing silence of a vacuum. It was the peaceful, clean silence of a job well done. Baron turned to me, his hands finding my waist. He didn't say anything at first, he just looked at me, his amber eyes searching mine. You're a void architect, he whispered, his thumb brushing the line of my jaw. And a revolutionary. And apparently, the Earth's personal janitor. I'm still Petra, I said, reaching up to straighten his tie, which was crooked from the fight. And I still expect you to pay for the cleaning of this roof. There's soot everywhere. Baron laughed, the sound warm and vibrant against the cool night air. He leaned down, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that tasted like victory and rain. I'll pay whatever you want, he murmured against my mouth. As long as you stay. I pulled back, a smirk playing on my lips. We'll see. I still have a business to rebuild, and I think I'm going to need a bigger van. But as we turned to head back to the ballroom to face the council, Juliana's voice stopped us. She was standing by the roof door, staring at the glowing vial I'd dropped during the fight. Petra, she said, her voice trembling. The overseer. It didn't just come to acknowledge you. Look at the horizon. I turned. In the distance, across the city skyline, dozens of silver lights were beginning to flicker to life. In every penthouse, every slum, and every pack house, the Nulls weren't just invisible anymore. They were waking up. Chapter 14. The Balcony Confession. The gala was no longer a party, it was a crime scene transition. As Baron and I walked back down the grand staircase, the atmosphere was thick with a brand of tension I hadn't encountered before. Total, unadulterated awe. The alphas who had spent the last hour trying to dominate the room were now standing in small, hushed groups, watching us as if we were royalty returning from the dead. Silas met us at the base of the stairs. He looked older, his face etched with the reality of what he'd just witnessed. Behind him, Victor was being led away in silver-lined cuffs by council guards. Victor looked smaller, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal, the biological static I'd left in his system making him twitch. Maxwell, Silas said, bowing his head deeply. Then, he turned to me. Ms. Creed, the council has much to discuss. Your actions tonight saved the lineage of a dozen packs. But the light we saw on the horizon... It's not just me anymore, is it? I asked, my voice echoing in the marble hall. The void has been dormant for a millennium, Juliana said, stepping up beside me. She looked out the glass walls of the ballroom at the silver pinpricks of light across the city. It's a chain reaction. Petra triggered the first dome, and now the rest of the voids are coming online. The world is resetting. The room erupted into murmurs. For the alphas, this was a nightmare. A world where their power could be neutralized by the very people they had ignored for centuries. But for me, it felt like the ultimate level playing field. I need air, I whispered to Baron. He didn't ask questions. He led me away from the council, through the stunned crowd, and out onto the massive stone balcony that overlooked the Obsidian Packlands. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and smelling of pine and wet stone. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the forest. My hands were finally steady, but the silver hum in my blood was still there, a quiet reminder that I wasn't just a girl with a spray bottle anymore. Baron stood behind me, his heat a constant grounding presence. He didn't try to alpha me. He didn't try to claim the moment. He just existed with me in the silence. "You're thinking about the business," he said, his voice a low, knowing rumble. "I'm thinking about the invoices," I corrected, a small smile tugging at my lips. If there are hundreds of voids waking up, they're going to need someone to teach them how to handle the sensory overload. They're going to need the formula. They're going to need protection. And you're going to provide all of it, Baron said. It wasn't a question. He stepped closer, his hands resting on the railing on either side of mine, effectively boxing me in. "You're going to build an empire of silence in a world that's too loud." I turned in the circle of his arms, looking up at him. The amber in his eyes was soft now, full of a devotion that made my heart ache. "And what about you, Baron? You're an alpha. Your whole world just got a lot more complicated. My presence alone is a threat to your standing." "Let them be threatened," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate, gravelly register. "I spent a century being an alpha because I had to. I'd spend the next century being your partner because I want to. I don't care if you can turn off my wolf with a look, Petra. My heart doesn't have a void switch." I reached up, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You're very poetic for a man who rips doors off hinges." "I'm a man in love with a woman who critiques my marble floors," he countered, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "And I still haven't officially courted you." "Court me?" I laughed. "Baron, we've fought a rogue pack, met an ancient shadow creature, and reset the Earth's biological balance. I think we're past the flowers and candy stage." "We haven't had a second date," he whispered, leaning in. "A real one. No syndicate, no council, no voids. Just you, me, and a very expensive restaurant that I'll probably have to buy just to make sure the kitchen is up to your standards." I felt the familiar spark jump between us, a steady, glowing warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the man in front of me. "I'll consider it," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "but only if I get to drive the van." Baron chuckled and was about to close the distance between us when a sharp, rhythmic tapping sounded on the glass door. We both turned. It was Dr. Eris, the pack physician. He looked like he'd been running marathons. He was holding his tablet and his face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. "Baron, Petra, you need to see this," he wheezed, shoving the tablet toward us. "Eris, if this is about my blood again," I started. "It's not your blood," he cried. "It's the moon. Look at the moon." We looked up. The silver moon was still there, high in the sky. But it wasn't silver anymore. A jagged, dark line had appeared across its surface, a crack that seemed to be spreading in real time, and from that crack a deep, resonant hum began to vibrate through the very air we breathed. It wasn't a sound. It was a countdown. "The void didn't just reset the shifters," Eris whispered, his voice trembling. "It opened the gate. Something is coming through, Petra, and it's not looking for a cleaner." Chapter 15. The New Rule. The crack in the moon looked like a lightning bolt frozen in silver. It wasn't a shadow or an eclipse. It was a physical rupture in the sky, and the humming it emitted felt like a tuning fork vibrating against my skull. For a woman who prided herself on being able to scrub away any mess, this felt like the ultimate uncleanable disaster. "Eris, tell me that's a localized atmospheric phenomenon," I said, my voice tight. "Tell me the moon isn't actually breaking." "It's not breaking, Petra," Eris whispered, his eyes glued to the readout on his tablet. "It's hatching." Baron's hand tightened on my waist, his alpha aura flaring so bright I could almost see the golden sparks in the air. Hatching? The moon is a celestial body, Eris. It doesn't have a biological function. It does when the voids wake up, Eris countered, his voice rising in panic. The voids are the anchors. For 1,000 years you kept the gate closed because you were empty. But when you flushed the building, when you pushed that much energy back into the atmosphere, you didn't just wake up the other voids. You signaled the origin. From the dark fissure in the moon, a stream of pure liquid light began to spill, falling toward the earth like a slow-motion meteor shower. But as it hit the atmosphere, it didn't burn up. It fanned out, forming a shimmering, translucent veil that draped over the city. In that moment, the world went silent. Not the crushing silence of my vacuum, but a deep, peaceful hush. The city lights flickered, the humming stopped, and for one heartbeat, every living thing on Earth held its breath. Then, the origin spoke. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling, a realization that the age of the predator was over. The shifter dominance, the human fear, the secret societies, it was all being scrubbed clean. The new rule, I whispered, the words surfacing from somewhere deep in my silver-tinted blood. What rule? Baron asked, his eyes searching mine. No more secrets, I said, looking out at the city. The veil, it's a filter. It's making everyone a null. The power isn't gone, Baron. It's just balanced. No more alphas commanding the weak. No more Syndicate hiding in the shadows. We're all just people now. Baron looked at his hands, then at the glowing horizon. He let out a long, slow breath, and the tension that had lived in his shoulders for a century finally dissolved. He wasn't the Obsidian Alpha anymore. He was just Baron, a man who was no longer responsible for the souls of 1,000 wolves, but for the life he wanted to build. I think, Baron said, a small, genuine smile breaking across his face, that I'm going to have a lot more time for those dinner dates. I laughed, the sound bright and defiant in the new world's silence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, dented spray bottle of miracle mist. I looked at it, then at the cracked moon, and finally at the man standing beside me. The world might be changing, I said, stepping into his arms and pulling his head down for a kiss that tasted like the future. But I still have a contract to fulfill, and I'm pretty sure the moon just tracked a lot of dust onto my planet. Baron wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight as the silver veil settled over the earth. We stood there on the balcony, a void and a wolf, watching the dawn of a world that was finally perfectly clean. You're going to invoice the universe, aren't you? He murmured against my hair. You bet I am, I whispered. And I'm charging triple for the overtime.